Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. This is our first Literacy Forum. We really appreciate you spending.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We have some amazing researchers here before you. They deserve a round of applause even before they start.
So my name is Dr. Bill Hank, and I'm Dean of the College of Education at Marquette University. And I thought maybe the first thing I should do is tell you who was talking to you first. Dr. Frida Russell, who's Dean of the College of Education and Leadership at Cardinal Stritch University. And the reason the two of us are up here today is because we're co-chairs of a group called the Education Deans of Greater Milwaukee. Normally when there's an education-related event in this building, you'll see the law school post and you'll see the banner for the College of Education. But ours is purposely not here today because this is a group of 9 institutions who are united in a common purpose to really serve the educational needs of the Milwaukee region. And I never get all 9 members right, but I'm going to read who we are. It's Alverno.
I think some of them are in the house.
Yeah.
Right?
If you are, please raise your hand. Alverno, Cardinal Stritch. You can raise your hand. Oh, good. Carroll University, Concordia, MATC, Wisconsin Lutheran, Mount Mary, UWM. Oh, great. And the one that I always forget to mention, Marquette University. Now, that's the God's honest truth. That's what I always leave out. I do just want to say that we want to thank the Faye Macbeth Foundation, who has supported our work in helping us plan and reinvent ourselves as a group and come up with some strategic priorities. And also the Greater Milwaukee Committee has been generous, extraordinarily helpful with us with materials and resources. About the event tonight.
Yeah. There is a Celebrating Teachers event tonight. The intent of the Educational Deans of Greater Milwaukee group is really to create space for critical and courageous and celebratory conversations and interaction with the broader community around educational issues and educational leadership issues. And so tonight we are celebrating some absolutely amazing educators. Through a panel of judges have decided that this is a group of educators who need to be acknowledged for their work in literacy. And so please come out and join us tonight and help us celebrate the great work that these educators are doing.
And the event is at the Anodyne Coffee House. I think it's 224 West Bruce Street or something like that. And it's the third event. The first event was UWM and Marquette kind of did it jointly last year. A very good event at Alverno, and then this is the third one. We also have a fourth event next year, which is going to be STEM related. And I think there's a save the date already that's out there, and it's Mount Mary and Carroll. Is that correct? Okay. I just did want to tell you that one of the pieces of work that we're doing is with the CISA 1, which is the Cooperative Extensive Service Agency. You know, we hope to be working with the superintendents, brainstorming on how we can help them build the capacity of their leadership teams. That's the primary project we're going to be taking on, but this literacy theme is really important to us. We all care about it. I'm a literacy educator and researcher myself, so I'm intrigued and fascinated by what we're going to here today. So I think that about wraps up our part, huh?
Yeah, so let's introduce Mark Sablejack. Here I asked him, I went to him and I said, okay, so I'm going to introduce you. What would you like me to say about you? He said briefly, 21 years as a publisher of Milwaukee Business Journal, 25-year advocacy in and for quality education. Part of Sponsor a Scholar initiative through the Y, UWM School of Ed, Board of Visitors, Greater Milwaukee Committee, Education Committee co-chair, and also Executive Committee of Milwaukee Succeeds. And he said, and I'm an all-around great guy, but my wife wouldn't say that. So to introduce to some and to make sure that you all get a good sense of what's going on with our panelists and as they bring their research. Mark is going to sort of moderate the panel. And he said I'm more of a background person, and so we want to make sure that we hear from the panelists, so I'm going to give the mic over to Mark.
Thank you. So, wonderful audience, a lot of new faces, some familiar faces, and if I haven't had a chance to say hi, Barb Felix, how are you? Longtime colleagues at the Journal Sentinel ages ago. So what's the publisher of the Business Journal doing in the front of a room? What's business doing in the front of the room? And Molly asked that question to me, and I said, you stole my introduction. I think it's really pretty simple. You know, there's always been a significant interest from business in the education pipeline. Obviously, it's where we get our employees from. So at its simplest, you know, that's the answer. But even more so today, I think the business community is as interested in education and education improvement as it's ever been. And having watched this scene now for 25 years, I think I can say that we're at a peak, and I don't see that interest waning. I think some of this is because of the difficult challenges we face with local student performance. Yes, we read newspapers, we see the studies, we see the headlines. We're not happy. I don't think anybody in this community or region is happy, whether they're in business, politics, no matter what. You know, some of it relates to legislative initiatives, and we've had more action over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years from Madison than we've ever had before. Some people are very supportive of that legislation, and some aren't. There's also, I think, at this time, more thought, muscle, and financial resources being put into education with initiatives like Milwaukee Succeeds, and I've been proud of the progress that we've made in 3 years. We have a long way to go, and I think Bill Hank said it best. We had a very nice luncheon of the panel before this, and began to get into what I hope we'll be able to get into in the next hour or so. It took us about 40 years to get where we are today. It's going to take us a bit to get out of it. And I think everybody is very impatient, but understanding that we need to be patient and we need to be smart as we move the education needle. There's a lot of hard work being done in the classroom and in developing literacy advancements with many of the leaders of this in the room today. And 5 of those are on our panel. Our introductions of them are brief because you have something in your handouts. Andrew Davis is the Culturally Responsive Practices Coordinator for the Wisconsin RTI Center. Barb Novak is Literacy Consultant with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Molly Schiffler, Professor Emerita and Director of the Literacy Center at Cardinal Stritch University. Deborah Keither, K-12 Director of Literacy, Milwaukee Public Schools. And Cheryl Ward, co-founder and private literacy practitioner with the Wisconsin Reading Coalition. We will have significant time at the end, unless we get into a great discussion here, and I want to try to end that, for Q&A. So if you have questions, I would suggest that, just jot them down so you don't forget them later on. And when it is time to ask questions, the little buttons in front of you, if you press those down and they turn red, that means you're on. So we're going to start. If we define literacy as the ability to use language proficiently, impacting reading, writing, speaking, and listening abilities, we've learned that only 15% of third-grade students across the city of Milwaukee demonstrate reading proficiency on state-administered reading assessments, making us one of the lowest-performing cities in the country. What a great lead-in. How might the following variables contribute to the status quo of literacy in our city? And the panel knows there's a series of variables. Variance and consistency of teaching and instructional practices, insufficient allocation of time, classroom size, teacher preparation, kind of on and on and on, and including insufficient emphasis on culturally relevant teaching practices. Who wants to address that first?
I'll jump right out. I think they're all important issues, but I certainly think that the support that we can give our teachers, the information that we can give them to allow them to effectively teach this very broad base of children. We talk about all children, and we know that there are subgroups of these kids, and they require specific instruction that really is going to meet their needs. And to do that, we really need to heavily invest more in our teacher, in preparing them, giving them ongoing professional development. There's so many issues that are really supportive of all of this, but really the foundational piece is giving those teachers the tools they need and the ongoing professional development they deserve.
Why don't we move down the line on this first question?
Combining the instructional practices, teacher preparation, and culturally responsive practices. One of the things that we've been looking at over time, I've worked with a large school district and again currently working at the state level, are how are we looking at what the families bring, how are we looking at their cultural values, how are we looking at their norms, how are we looking at their ways of being, and how are we incorporating all of those things into our teacher preparation programs so that they will impact how students or our student teachers are selecting curriculum materials, or how are they going about their pedagogical approaches? Are they honoring and building a fluency around that broad range of students that they're serving? So do they have toolkits where they are building fluency and having ways of being able to identify, are they bringing in cultural practices, cultural norms, pedagogical approaches, materials that are speaking to the broad range of students that are before them? So how are we building our background knowledge about what students are bringing in and what they've brought in from historical perspectives and what their families are also teaching them early on before they even enter our doors?
Barb?
I'm going to build on what Andrell said. One of the variables that wasn't included in the list that was read was family engagement. How are we engaging families in their children's education? How are we engaging community members in their in the education of the children in their own community? And really seeing families and community members as equal partners who bring valuable pre-existing literacy practices to the doors of the school. Every child, every family that enters our schools is literate and has some form of literacy that they bring to our schools. And as a school system, it's our responsibility to help children learn to succeed in the academic world of literacy. Literacy means something very different in academics than it does in a lot of children's family lives. But that academic literacy shouldn't come at the expense of the literacies that the child and the family bring to the school and bring to the community. So really learning to understand the ways in which children and their families are literate and finding ways to honor that and capitalize on that as we teach children to engage in the literacies that they're going to need for long-term academic success and career and college success.
And I'm going to keep that theme going and also add the idea of the type of professional development that teachers really need, and that is encompassing all of the things that have been mentioned up to this point. It's a different kind of professional development that requires a lot of energy and intensity, because the development of the teacher is so complex with all of these different areas that, when we think about having a session that teachers go to, we really have to think differently about how we get this learning to them while they are in the actual setting, working with real time with the students that are there, and encompassing all of these pieces.
And the list that we have in front of us has 10 factors, and Barb just added an 11th. And I think every single one of those factors is critical. There's no way that we can separate them out. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize is taking a good look at what is working. What are the places where we see success? What are the practices where we see success? We've got a rich bank of literature in the literacy field, looking at maybe 20 years of what has worked in urban education. We've seen these programs work beautifully in Milwaukee Public Schools, a school that we had worked with, where we had put that specific program into place, and that school tripled what was expected for annual yearly progress. So I think to a large extent we look at all these factors, we look at what is working, what does research tell us works, and then we need to bring that up to a scale where we can reach more students.
Molly, if something worked in a single school like that, why wasn't it magnified? Why wasn't it grabbed and taken to scale? What are the factors that work against that?
I think everything that was done in that particular case to keep that going was done. I had terrific support from the folks in MPS who are working with us, constant, strong collaboration, and it's a matter of having the funding, the personnel to bring those things to a larger scale.
And I'm going to chime in because we talked about this earlier too. It does become difficult to replicate on the scale when we know when we've identified what we need to do, because there is, we don't have the capacity in terms of personnel to fill all these needs. So if we know what we need, we just now need a population of people that is qualified and willing to do that work, and it's becoming more and more difficult to find individuals that, for a variety of reasons, that are available to do this kind of work.
Can I piggyback on
Absolutely.
that as well? I wanted to say I led a similar initiative in a different school district, and the project that we were working on was over a 5-year period. And what we identified some practices that were really powerful in helping us close the achievement gap around literacy. But what ended up happening is change in leadership. So the change in leadership at the school level, and then also change in leadership at the district level, and the initiatives that were chosen to be a priority for the district changed, and so we lost the momentum, and it was really disheartening because the initiative that I helped lead, it started in a Saturday program, moved into a school, moved school-wide, then moved to the district level, and then right at the beginning where we had built a lot of capacity, the change occurred. So over that 5-year period, the change occurred, and then we lost the momentum around the initiative.
And as true as all that is, and it is true, we had a long discussion about capacity. We have a critical capacity issue at all levels within education. But I think it's hard to disentangle sometimes the individual school from the whole of the teaching community. I think that the capacity issue is something that rides tandem, and you can't avoid it. But we really need to look at our data of all our subgroups. Overall in the state, certainly in the city, we have a significant problem. We all know that already. We look at the data, and it is so telling what needs to happen. We need to really figure out instruction at that foundational skill set level that the teachers can actually administer and get mentoring and coaching and supporting, going back to the capacity issue. But if we avoid that foundational knowledge piece of the teacher, and the research is just overflowing from Connecticut, Spear Swirling, Michael Coyne, to Josie in Texas, to Louise Motes, who's been working years and years and on. We have an essential knowledge issue for our teachers, and we really need to support them, and we need to not make it negative in any way. That's a huge mission. This isn't the teacher's fault. We need to give them more tools and build the capacity for everything that's been mentioned.
And I'm going to add, in the true spirit of literacy, because we often talk about reading as the deficit area. Obviously, that's true. And, we're studying this. We know what works. But we haven't done enough work to also simultaneously do what needs to be done in the area of writing, which should go hand in hand, because, I mean, that is still even a bigger issue than reading itself, and you can't do one without the other. So just to shine a light on that too.
Well, and interesting, when I hear that, and writing is critically important, we know that. We tend to want to go to our outcomes, our vocabulary, our comprehension, our writing. We do. That's where we want to go. But I would like us to bring more attention to the bottom side of those foundational skill sets, the entryway into being able to write, being able to put those words on the paper, being able to spell them, being able to talk about a piece of text with complex semantics and syntax, and understand what's being written. If we can't start to more comfortably talk about those early skills, someone up here had talked about how early it is, pre-K, first grade. That's where our resources need to go, but not exclusively. We must start talking about these foundational reading skill attainments.
What, Deborah, you mentioned capacity, and one of the issues of capacity is individuals. What's at the cause of that?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I can speak from Milwaukee Public Schools, a very large district that, in all honesty, we have a lot of mobility. If it's not just within our district from school to school, we have a lot of mobility of folks coming in and out of the district too. And the amount of time, just like all trends in jobs show that, people don't necessarily stick to one place anymore. They're moving around because they're looking for that good fit. And so that, coupled with, the current climate of education, it does not make it an attractive place to be. So for the amount of workload that's attached to it. So we're talking big, major work here. So there's a lot of, you mentioned earlier, the players change a lot, and that becomes very hard to grab onto something and take it all the way to fruition. And so, that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I say that in my own particular instance. So.
And, the Milwaukee Succeeds Project has something going on in a couple of our parochial schools, some in school tutoring and mentoring and so on. And it's early phases, but we're starting to move the needle a little bit. But I know a story of, the teachers are paid in that kind of environment very little money. So any training beyond the day is certainly not attractive to them. So how do we incentivize our teachers to actually get the training that they need, get the education that they need? Any teacher wants to do the right thing, and they want to take advantage of any learning that they can get, but we don't make it easy for them. So if we don't make it easier for them, we don't build the capacity. And if you don't build the capacity, you're going to be able to either service a few kids or you're not going to effectively service them.
And I'm thinking about a program that we moved out across one district called Read Your Heart Out. And with that particular program, we invited community members and family members to come into the school to read books that students could actually see themselves in. But more importantly, to piggyback on how do we get incentive around professional development, but also honor that teachers' time is really valuable and that they have lives outside of school as well. And so we turn that program or event into a professional development opportunity where they were actually able to, and we had created some look-fors for them to really hone in on as family members were reading in their classrooms the types of pedagogical approaches that were being used, or when family members brought in specific pieces of literacy or literature that was important to them and their families, how could the practitioners capitalize on what was important to the families? Even so, going so far as to have them hone in on classroom management strategies that were being used by the community members members and by family members, and how all of that was being combined in the name of literacy and in the name of family engagement, and how it went beyond just having people come in to read, but also turned into a professional development opportunity.
So in the brief examples that I've heard on this panel, I think one of the themes that I'm really hearing is the teacher as the expert, and really the teacher as really an intellectual, and the teacher as a researcher. You noticed a problem in the school, you noticed a gap in the data, and Wisconsin schools certainly have that data readily available to them through WISE Public, which is what anybody can go to look, anybody anywhere can use to look at student achievement data, and then WISE Secure that schools and districts can use to really dig into their student subgroups and the gaps that Cheryl mentioned earlier, along with the process called WISE Explore that the department has set out to really help schools look thoughtfully at those gaps and to hypothesize about what might be causing what they're seeing in their data, and to really look at the data as a whole picture, not just looking at literacy data, which is undoubtedly valuable, and not just looking at standardized literacy data, but also looking at other literacy data, because as we've mentioned, writing is important. There's not a whole lot of writing in a test where you have to fill in bubbles, and speaking and listening are important, which really aren't assessed at all on standardized measures. But not just your literacy data, also your science and math data, also your behavior data, also your family engagement data, your student involvement data. So really the teacher as an expert and the teacher as a researcher able to engage in that process of looking at data, setting a goal, understanding what educational research says, which is more available to educators than ever before, trying practices, monitoring how those are going with students in their classroom, adjusting their instruction, working with the coach, working with their administrator, constantly being aware of how their students are performing, and then looking for the outcomes based on the exact actions that they've taken. So really, I feel like that's the process that was described in some of these examples here. Now, that process is actually the exact process for student learning objectives and school learning objectives, which are part of Wisconsin's system for educator effectiveness. So that's a nice little thoughtful coincidence there. But that sits on top of a really well-built curriculum. At the district level, your schools, your districts, your school boards are making decisions about the curriculum. They're making decisions about the standards. Those foundational skills standards that Cheryl mentioned are really, for the first time in our 2010 standards, really clearly laid out from kindergarten. Here's what students should know by the end of kindergarten. Not just foundational skills, but also comprehension, writing, speaking and listening, language use, all of those pieces weaving together. And it's laid out more clearly than it ever has been in Wisconsin for foundational skills from kindergarten through 5th grade. So all of those foundational structural pieces are in place on top of this process that I think really empowers teachers and encourages teachers to be part of an intellectual community, which will hopefully keep people in the teaching profession and keep people coming toward the teaching profession.
And those foundational standards, they were not created by Wisconsin. These are the standards from the National Common Core standards that the group of experts had put into these standards and the work that they did. Marilyn Adams, Louis Motes again, putting these standards in. Those standards are really out of the English language piece of the Common Core. So for a long time they were completely ignored, weren't referred to. We're now changing that. But those standards are very different than the standards that we had put in place. So this now is our opportunity to look at those standards and then to build coursework and professional development around those standards. However, we are, in a local control state. We just talked about our, separate school boards and our districts making decisions, and that's our reality right now. But you have to have people that embrace those standards and really dig in deep, because reading is really complex. They are outlined. So then once you dig into the standards, you can then anticipate and you can actualize and see your gaps in your teacher educational needs and provide that professional development to them. And many of the things in those standards haven't been historically actualized in our classrooms. And that's really where I think the real work lives. Because overall, we are doing a number of good things, and we can talk about them, and they're important. But we really just have to go back and really understand, again, how prepared are our teachers to be able to teach these diverse students. We know we have lots of struggling readers. We know we have lots of students that are educationally disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged. We know we have English language learners. We know we have students with disabilities. We know we have Tier 2 students, just struggling readers. These are our seed students. These are our big group of students. And so again, everything comes back to how well do we support that teacher in pre-service and ongoing.
The next question really got into what you're talking about, Cheryl. It is, what are we doing to better prepare teachers, structure our classrooms, school day, school year, and utilize targeted support for teachers, students, and parents/caregivers? Maybe we've covered some of that, but there's other pieces of it, whether it's school day, school year, et cetera. Who would like to jump in on that?
Factors that I think of that are very, very important there. And I certainly, Cheryl, agree with you on those Common Core standards buried in there. One of the things we do at our Stritch Literacy Centers, I know my title is Professor Emerita, but basically I'm a practitioner and I've been doing that for 30 years. And so we're very concrete about what we do. And one of the things we do at our centers is take those exact foundational skills and we track them with each child. We have them lined up with the specific reading levels that they go with, and we are very sure, as we're going back to work with our kids, that we're covering each of those particulars. And that's what I work with when I work with classroom teachers as well, is bring this hidden document out as a real gem in terms of the concrete. Thank you. A nice coach up there in the front row was saying, move this way. But I think those standards can be used very, very concretely. A couple factors here, again, moving to the very concrete of things that we've found have worked extremely well for us. And one is a teacher program that we spent a whole, I'm hearing the echo, I'm sorry. We spent a whole spring, this was something called the Wisconsin Improvement Teacher Quality Grant, and it was a collaboration between DPI, the Wisconsin University Systems, and Cardinal Stritch. And we had 70 teachers in this program over a 6-year period. And it began with weekly sessions with very intense work on literacy assessment and intervention. We actually labeled it a 600-level course, which is above a master's level course, because of the intensity we went into in that course. One of the things we were working out were the specific vowel patterns in words. And the course was written, the program was written that we would start with individual intervention and then move to classroom intervention. The teachers, after the first 2 or 3 sessions, were saying, I want big copies of those vowel pattern charts. I want big copies of those words for my classrooms, because that's where this wants to go. Over the summer, they assessed a student, then the next year, they worked with students one-to-one. And we always have outside evaluators evaluate our data. We were looking at statistical significance, a less than 99% chance this would have happened without the intervention in every one of 14 assessments of the students that went through that program. And what was even more exciting to us was in a study that a research group in Madison did, was that they looked at the students in the classroom of the teachers who were in that program. These were not the students that were actually being tutored. They were just in the classrooms of the teachers that had that rich bank of knowledge. And lo and behold, somewhat to our surprise, not only were they going up RTI points on the measures we were using at that time, but they were actually moving from those big categories that we looked at when we talk about below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. We saw the students in those rooms moving well into upper categories. So I think we've got some tremendous examples of what we can do to support teachers with simply deeper knowledge about literacy.
We have a lot of information too from all kinds of states, from Florida to Massachusetts to Delaware to Washington D.C. to pockets of schools all across where they're doing it more intensively, doing it right, learning those how to lift the word off the page, working at the sound level, the oral language level, that early childhood piece of it. So the examples are rich. The majority of the examples are really, you have to point outside of Wisconsin for a lot of examples, but they're there. And so we want to, replicate what Molly is doing as much as we can and build deeper on it. She's totally on target. The more the teacher knows, but what is so interesting, and it's interesting if you think about it in terms of how you had to code your course as a 600 level course, this is foundational knowledge for our teachers. This is what we're looking for our teachers to have on day one in any kindergarten classroom, first grade classroom, third grade. We have nothing but struggling readers. Why don't they have this information? There is a disconnect, and that again just supports that teacher knowledge piece. So I couldn't concur more.
How can we expand support systems for urban students, particularly in low-performing schools? And I guess I'm intrigued on, Cheryl, when you mentioned what's happening in other states. Why isn't that happening here?
I think it's a complex answer. I think there's many parts, but I do feel that overall, I think that we have been complacent. We haven't been education hasn't really had to look for the science in a long time. We have some of it we haven't had in place. We've got it in place. We have been able to be a little bit more isolated in what kind of data we historically have collected, how we used it. It's been inconsistent. And again, you can layer local control on that as well. But overall, and I'm not talking just Wisconsin here, I'm talking overall the field of education. We've been educating for a long time, but it really has been philosophical based and an art. And there's a lot of art in education, just like there's a lot of art in medicine. But medicine has matured as a profession because of the objectivity in the data and the ability to self-govern, make those know when things aren't working, change systems. It's been more difficult in education. So if you think of it in terms of how we prepare our teachers at our schools of ed, we have some work to do there in terms of standards. We have work to do at the Department of Instruction level with standards and teacher certification, and that work is happening. So across the country, some of the states that I'm talking about have had, Massachusetts is the best example of having a more comprehensive reading exam in place for many years, kind of considered the gold standard for basic hit the road instruction. We now have that in Wisconsin. We've just begun to implement it. We want to do much better with our teacher outcomes, but it's limited only to preparation. These teachers get in classrooms and the structures aren't there to support their ongoing learning, their mentorship, their coaching, their supervision. So people like myself, and I see a few faces in the audience that work with struggling readers of all kinds, from not struggling a lot to profoundly struggling with learning disabilities. This is the kind of information that we've had to deal with for many years to get these children reading. And we see that success. So it is here in Wisconsin, but it's outside of our systems.
Yes.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, you just hit that on the head because it's happening in pockets. So like what we're talking about here with these particular examples are things that were made possible through external dollars, grant funding or, private businesses. And it should be the standard of care that's just there from the beginning. It should be part of the infrastructure. So, and that rich experience that the teacher has to have ongoing while, again, they are in the midst of the work. Because even if you spent a lot of time front-loading that, you simply are not going to have somebody who's fully prepared to navigate all of that diversity and all of the different pieces academic levels and just a variety of things that they constantly need to be learning about. So there has to be a way to make it part of the infrastructure.
Andrea?
I want to say, I want to bring the voice of the layman to the conversation. And I want to bring us to a place where we combine what research tells us and what we know and what we bring. I want you to bring the stories of your grandmother. I want you to bring the proverbs that your grandfather told you. I want you to bring the songs that you grew up on. I want you to bring the approaches you take to beginning a new relationship with someone that you're interested in. I want you to think about the relationship you began with your husband, with your wife, with your partner. And I want you to think about all the groundwork that you did to develop that relationship. And I want you to think about the patient that goes in to see the doctor who has done a lot of work over time and knows the research and knows the language and knows the lingo and knows all of the medical terms. But I want you to think about how equally as important it is that the patient is able to bring in what he or she knows about his or herself, and about, because it's not on paper or someone else has not documented the data behind it, that it doesn't make it less than. That when you combine both the research and what people bring to the equation, the professional development experiences and teacher preparations, especially because of the changing face of our society and how many teachers will be in front of students who don't look like them, who do not have the cultural experiences, who have not walked in the shoes of the students that they are going to be serving, that you have to do work beyond the data and the research that we comfortably live in day to day, that we have to combine family experiences and voices and knowledge and cultural norms and legacies. And the professional development has to be steeped in, I'm not saying either or, I'm saying both and. And so one of the opportunities that we offered to the teachers I talked about that we worked with for 7 years and we now offer at the state level in our culturally responsive practices training, and that I use to lead our staff into a better understanding about how important culture plays in our work, is called 7 Experiences, where you actually go into schools where people are fluent around reaching all of the learners that are before them and have experiences and walked in shoes that are similar to those students that are before them. So they go into they have community site visits. They go to schools and they see practitioners who have done this kind of work. They hear guest speakers who can give them the research, because we know we can't do this work without that research, but the research behind what they're trying to learn. They also go to conferences and workshops, but beyond that, the workshops that they attend are strategically chosen to deepen their knowledge about their students in particular areas. And then they also have the school visits, site visits, book studies, articles, conferences and workshops, and coaching and modeling. So taking all of that work and everything that they've learned and bringing it into their practice. And so making the students' lives and things that they're going to be participating in anyway as a practitioner a part of their professional development. But I really want to say, let's honor both sides, what the families bring and the expertise and the values and the norms and the legacies and what we bring, and how can we bridge those with the research and the data that we look for.
And tagging on to that, it's so important to not forget that piece, because I know I do some parent workshops, and it is just so delightful to see parents hearing some information and engaging and feeling empowered then, because then doing that and respecting that allows them to ask more pertinent questions about their kids where maybe they weren't. So it's kind of that double whammy of give me some information And also, you're respecting me enough to get that information. And you're understanding the obstacles that maybe there aren't books in the home and so on and so forth. And so it's, to me, that has to tag along with everything that you do to provide those foundational skills.
The last question, and we can double back on some of them if we have a few more minutes. What collaborative partnerships are working to elevate and impact improvements in literacy-focused education?
Right off the top of my head,
Dolly, put that down.
right off the top of my head, I think of about 5 of them, actually, that I think have been critical in the community. I know for us, working with the Milwaukee Public Schools has been a tremendous collaboration over the years, starting with the WITQ program I talked about, the T4U program, the Gear Up program. We've always found receptiveness, openness, a very willing hand to work with everything we could possibly offer. Another shout out would be to the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Through that funding, we've been able to put together the actual staff development professional piece that I'm talking about that's available to schools. It's something that Deborah and I have been talking about incorporating this year within the Milwaukee schools, which would help us. These are replicable models where it isn't dependent on someone delivering the information who is there coaching you, has been part of that. It's models with tapes that can be replicated in other ways. That's been through Greater Milwaukee. One of the very helpful things that's happened through Milwaukee Succeeds has been that we've had a small group. It was Action Committee 23 about 3 years ago, and Action Committee 23 was supposed to reach a consensus among groups in Milwaukee about what are the best practices, what is the foundational knowledge, what is going to move us ahead as a community. And we put together a document. It's our foundational document. It's available on the website. And I have a feeling Karen may be sending it out too. But it was agreed upon. We worked with the Wisconsin Reading Coalition on it. Stritch worked on it. We had review by the University of Wisconsin literacy professors on it. We felt it was a very solid document. And appreciate the Milwaukee Succeeds effect in that area too. And again, great collaborations with the UW system and DPI for moving ahead with these initiatives. So I think we've got some wonderful initiatives going on in our community.
I'd like to give a shout out too to Howard Fuller, who has figured out a way with one of the colleagues here in the audience, Mary Newton, to provide some ongoing professional developments, letters training, language essentials for teachers of reading. He has generously allowed all kinds of individuals, teachers in MPS, outside of MPS, educators that are working privately, and so on. And these teachers over and over again that participate, how do we get more? Why didn't we get this? And so I think that he deserves to be recognized for his support in that program and finding the funding. I don't know where he got all the money, but he's been funding it.
Others? Barb?
Working at the state level with the Wisconsin RTI Center, we have several collaborations that I think are really powerful. One is with DPI, and we actually had a 3-day coming together of the various grants that come out of DPI to really be intentional about our common language, about how the standards that we are presenting from the various facets of work that we do, how can we come together and not make it feel like one more thing, but where are the overlaps? And also powerful collaborations we train schools across the entire state. And so collaborations with schools who are willing to focus on culturally responsive practices across a multi-level system of support, and being able to help us identify best practices, help us identify powerful programs, strategies, skills that are reaping those data points that we're going for. Onalaska School District, the Madison School District. We worked with Milwaukee School District last year, and some of the initiatives that they've moved out this year are direct results from the collaborative work that we did in that training. And so I want to kind of just give a shout out to DPI and to the various schools that are helping us do this research and move this work out.
In addition to the partners that everyone has mentioned, I guess I would also add professional organizations, the organizations that represent teachers, the organizations that represent curriculum directors, the organizations that represent principals, superintendents, school boards, as vehicles for professional learning, as vehicles for disseminating information, as organizations that celebrate successes, as organizations that offer grants and financial support to teachers looking to do action research in their classrooms. I think they're an important partner that we can't forget about. And I also think that they are a great way to engage pre-service teachers in the larger profession of teaching, to really show pre-service teachers from the beginning that by getting involved in an organization, they're part of a larger community and part of a healthy profession.
And I'm going to add, I'm not going to list the same folks because actually I would ditto everybody that's been mentioned up to this point, but I want to make a point to kind of honor all the work that's been done. And it's been very refreshing to truly collaborate with all of these entities because it has not been a disposition of let us show you how to do this right or let us show you how to fix this. But it has truly been a let's sit down at the table, let's be thought partners in this work, and let's figure out how each of us, I mean, you've heard a lot of different programs kind of mentioned, but at the heart of all of them, and you said this earlier, it's in the name of literacy. So to get rid of all the distraction, regardless of what your program might be, named, it still is that work. And the team and all the groups mentioned so far have really been very and truly collaborative in that work. So I've enjoyed it.
So I'm going to, you mentioned the voice of a layman, Andriel, and for somebody that has grown up outside the education system and has had the value of education and all of it in Milwaukee, whether it's a Catholic grade school, Pius High School, Marquette University, and UWM, it strikes a lot of us as difficult to understand why there is a literacy problem. I had parents who provided me books from, when I could probably walk. I had teachers in 6th grade that encouraged me to get involved with our grade school newspaper. I had a teacher at high school who said, you write very well, you should be on our newspaper as well. And, I had help all along the way. I think the business community is intensely interested in education in general, and certainly in the components like literacy. Why hasn't this gotten better? And I throw that out there, because, for those of us involved in education, I think what we're trying to do is bring more business leaders, more community leaders into the tent to help the effort. And my sense is that many of them just don't get it. And when, the terminology begins to, come forth from teachers and others, it kind of causes a translation problem. So what do? How do we get better?
Well, I talked over lunch about in our research for like one particular group, when we were researching in the Saturday program that my husband and I ran for 12 years, and the practitioners in that program and my husband and I traveled the country looking at best practices and models around African American student achievement. And one of the things that we learned is that early on, historically, some of the entry points for literacy for many African American families were around songs, storytelling, and proverbs. And so when you think about those three areas, you think about a rich oral tradition. And you think about how with some of our Hmong students, their stories were not written. It was, again, a strong oral tradition. And so again, in learning about those different entry points and historical ways of accessing literacy, how do you honor the way that they are accessing literacy, but also help families understand how those ways of transferring literacy can be written down, or how can you take those stories that the students are hearing and write them down and help students understand that the print goes, from the left to the right with the stories that their grandfathers were telling them. Or if they're into a specific song, how can you write those lyrics down and sing those songs to them and move your finger in a way that they begin to want to interact with print in a way that they may not have done historically because, again, this rich oral tradition. When you mentioned the various ways and the things that you were involved in to access literacy, those are very different ways than the ways that I just described, where another family may have literacy presented to them in a different way. So as Dr. Holly would say, Shiraki Holly, how do you validate and affirm the way that they access literacy but build and bridge to what's going to be expected in academia? And so how do you honor those different ways that families are actually interacting with literacy?
I told the speakers as we got closer to 1, I'd give them 30 seconds to a minute to kind of give some closing statements. And is there anything that you'd like to pick out from the discussion? Is there anything that you haven't been able to say? And Molly, you get to go first.
He said he wasn't going to do that. I think that one of the huge messages is collaboration, and I think scaling up, and I think we need to look beyond specific teachers, specific districts, and look at what are we doing at a state level in terms of legislation, in terms of funding. So many of the things we know are best practice are heavily dependent, things like class size, adequate materials, inadequate funding. So I think we need to look at scaling up where our areas of influence are, even beyond classrooms and districts. The other thing I would mention is that everything that I read about early literacy says it should be early language starting in the home, it should be explicit, and it should be culturally relevant. So I guess that would be my takeaway with what we are doing now. Is it early? Is it explicit? Is it culturally relevant?
Deborah.
And I think I would say that one of the key pieces I'd like to kind of have resonate beyond today is the idea of redesigning professional development experiences for teachers while they're going through their preschool, the part before they graduate, and then after, once they are placed in an actual classroom setting. And so I would love to see how that changes around how we have truly a global society where we have diverse learners coming to us from all parts of the globe and really helping our teachers to address that range.
And to prepare children to work in all parts of the globe. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about that I'm going to use my 30 seconds for is really creating intentional systems of support. As has been mentioned many times, we are a local control state. And I don't feel like that's a phrase that I'm hiding behind. I feel like that's a phrase that I'm proud of because it lets us do a lot of these culturally responsive practices that have really been a focus of this conversation here. And at the state level, we work hard to provide support for schools and districts in designing their system, in helping people think through, you should first have a strong universal curriculum that includes the foundational skills that have been discussed that meets the needs of all of your students. In addition to that, you need to have assessments in place that help you know which kids aren't getting it. In addition to that, you need to have interventions in place to provide support to those children and to consistently engage families. Now, it's up to the schools and the districts to decide what to pour into that, what assessments to pour into that, what texts to pour into that, even what standards to pour into that. But this idea of being systematic and planning for success for all students while at the same time meeting the needs of students who just aren't quite getting it yet, I think is something that we haven't really touched on yet.
Andrew?
Historically, we know that we continue to see groups of students who are being underserved, and that's part of the reason why we're here today. And I just want to say that we have done a lot of research, and we've been researching as long as that data has been showing what it's showing. And so we know the saying, if you're doing something and it's not working and you keep doing it, it's the definition of insanity. And so how are we going to combine, again, the voice of the layman? How are we going to learn from the families? How are we going to learn from historical legacies, values, norms, pedagogical approaches, and honor what we know in academia around the research and the data, and bring those two together to reach the goals and the outcomes that we're all striving for?
Cheryl.
I would have a deeper, broader, richer discussion of the science and the evidence of outcomes. Our data in the state shows that we don't, overall, we have about 35% of everybody reading proficiently. Our students with disabilities, a majority of which have normal to above normal IQ, we have about 8% of them reading. Our black males, we have about 12% that are proficient in reading. What is the evidence that the SHINE shows us of the reading brain? We have it all. We have it all. We know the science. We know the steps in reading acquisition. We can embrace all of these other things, ditto all the way down. But we must look at the science. We must be driven by data and look at the evidence. And we should not be making decisions that isn't evidence-based. It's not just research. It's not just science. It's not just citing a literature report. It's the evidence. Where is the evidence of how do you teach a reading brain at any age? Because in the state, we have 28%, 23 to 28% of our adults are illiterate or low literacy. Our kids grow up, and that's why the business community needs to be involved. And I welcome that, because that's our workforce, and we aren't talking about some of these things in depth.
Okay. It's time for questions. If you have one, just raise your hand, and then remember to hit the button until it turns red. If it doesn't turn red, we won't be able to hear you. Anybody want to start? Phil. Okay, touch the rim, and then it'll turn red, and then you're on. So, first question. Yes, please. Yes. We'll go Boys and Girls Clubs.
Do I keep it touched? Okay. Cheryl, thank you very much, because you sort of gave a lead into what I was going to ask anyway.
You're welcome.
Not much said today about community engagement. And I think that, there's a lot of knowledge base in this room without question, and a lot of experience. But to your point earlier, Mark, why isn't it working? And it seems to me that the greater community has got to be instrumental in helping us all move the needle. So I'd be curious to know the panel's thought on how do we make that part of it happen as well.
I think we've got to educate the public much more and not be afraid to talk about what we're not doing so hot at. Not be afraid to say we've got capacity issues. Not be afraid to talk about how we don't have, the coaching and the mentoring that we need. And start talking about it. And start being honest. And I think that when you start to do that, and again, I feel that I see this through the parent workshops, through Milwaukee Succeeds, which is a role that I chose, and I see one of my parent coordinators shaking her head, yes. It is transformational when they get knowledge, and we have to start talking about it.
And to remember that this is societal-centric versus egocentric. If there are, we're all working towards the same goal. So we truly are putting our focus on the outcomes for the children, and sometimes we just have to, put aside some of our own personal, desire for advancing a certain idea and work towards that collective good of making progress towards students.
The Read Your Heart Out event that I talked about was actually largely family and community members coming in to read to the students, choose the the literature that students could see themselves in. And then one of the ways that we extended that through those 7 experiences is that we had a 3-day professional development opportunity for practitioners in 4 schools at the Boys and Girls Club, and actually walked around the Boys and Girls Club to look and see how are they, how is the Boys and Girls Club setting up how they go about establishing rules. What are some of the protocols that are being used? How are students transitioning from one activity to another? What kinds of community resources are available at the Boys and Girls Club that staff members could actually use? And the whole purpose of that was so that they would be able to, again, a part of 7 experiences, one of the community site visits, Boys and Girls Club, but beyond just going to the Boys and Girls Club, holding professional development there, and then creating common language within the school that bridged to what they knew many of their students were hearing in after-school programming at the Boys and Girls Club. So we used those 7 experiences to say many of our students are accessing this kind of programming. They're right down the street. They're hearing language here in the school, language at the Boys and Girls Club. They're following specific protocols. How do we bridge all of that work? And what can we learn from the Boys and Girls Club that's really working that we can utilize in the school setting as well?
Another spot we've seen some real promise, I think, Pat, is bridging with what we call the experiential groups, the groups that do museums, art, music in the community, because for all our children, no matter what their background is, the vocabulary, the language that they bring to literacy is so important. I can't tell you how many times I'll be in a 5th grade room and a student can decode a word, but they don't know what the word means. The word depot is a good example, unless, of course, now there's Home Depot, so it kind of erodes the train pulling into the depot in the old stories. But I think one of the things we're seeing is the groups, experiential groups, the theater groups, the music groups, coming together and partnering with academic groups so that we're pulling into the community into providing all kids with those rich background experiences that are so terribly important in the middle and upper grades as they start to work with critical thinking, reading comprehension.
Over here.
First, I would like to do a shout out during the introductions. I'm a graduate of Springfield College of Human Services, and I didn't hear that school announced. We went through an announcement, so I just want to put a shout out to Springfield. My background, I'm a human service practitioner and / case manager for social work. And I'm in the homes of individuals who are seeking social services and that type of things like that. And it was one night listening to public radio, and where I heard the announcement of how low black children of 3rd graders, their levels. And from there, I contacted the Reading Coalition, and I'm very sure. And she suggested that I also participate in the Howard Ford's letters reading program last year. I'm not a teacher, but I'm very concerned about my community. Walking in crisis and understanding the power of education. But
Excuse me, can you keep your finger on that rim? It's got to stay on.
oh,
Yes.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm here today, and I'm excited about this conversation actually moving forward. My question is the role of our 3 systems of education, and that's MPS, choice, and charter. A couple months ago, I actually was real short, taught in a choice school. And the question from this particular parent was, and I was teaching 1st and 2nd graders, she said, could you take my daughter back to kindergarten level because she can't read? And I was like, oh my God. Now this is from a choice school. So my question is, because of these 3 systems of education we have here, and this bringing that together and holding those systems accountable for teaching these children all the basics. And I think that's where we're sold off. You know, we don't have two systems, we have three. You,
Barb, you want to handle that one, being from the state level? Sorry.
No. I'm a real person outside of my State Department job, so I kind of have like this inner monologue going on between what like the real person would say and what like the State Department person would say. So I think the happy medium that I can find between the two is that our state legislature is a really large part of the community that I think we also need to bring into the conversation. Not just because of the issue that you're, the very important issue that you're raising, but also because of the funding issues that have been brought up, because of the teacher quality issues that have been brought up, because of the preparation for the workforce issues that have been brought up. And I think understanding how to communicate with a legislature that elected by a state that really seems to value competition in education and choice in education, figuring out how to make that conversation productive, including the legislature, I think is critical to what you're talking about.
And I'm going to mention that in my work with Milwaukee Succeeds, we are trying to be all-encompassing and letting that not dictate what we do as a group. You might be from a charter school. I can still learn something from you, and we can still build something together, even though you have different formulas that are used to calculate your budget and so forth. That application can still move forward. And so when we talk about the work that we've been doing, we've always brought in everybody. So it's not just Milwaukee Public Schools. We also are inclusive to all of the institutions because they're the children of Milwaukee. So, you know, yeah, it's complicated, and it does get frustrating when, you know, you look at budgets, but in terms of the conversation and the work we can build together collectively, we can still do that piece.
Barbara, I have to give you an A+ for a masterful answer, balancing the two hats that you wear.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any question from a leadership perspective in Milwaukee Succeeds that we would like to have more data, and we'd like to have it from all the schools. And unfortunately, it's not in the control of Milwaukee Succeeds, it's not in MPS, it's not in DPI, it's someplace else in Madison. And I think, you know, the message that I deliver is we have to educate ourselves more about what's happening within education, those of us outside, and the individuals up front here play a very good role in that. And then we have to be more vocal in how we ask our elected officials to interact with the schools, and we have to be deliberate. So,
May I add?
Yes.
Not getting into the waters of choice, charter, public, private, etc., but overall, for all of them, in some of our schools, of course, you know, we have some unqualified, meaning don't have, you know, individuals that may not possess an educational certification in their field or etc. But we really do, you know, we have a lot of schools where they do. So if you think of it in terms of whatever the school is, public, private, charter, voucher, we're drawing from the same base of talent. And I think that's the important part in this. If you're looking at a first grader, second grader that's not reading, and there's many other reasons, and we heard a lot of them, you can layer on, but what's going on instructionally, that's the question you have to come back to.
can you introduce yourself, and remember, keep the red on.
Sure. My name's, is it working?
Yes.
My name's Lolly Hawes. I'm superintendent in Racine Unified School District, and I just have two things I'd like to say. I'm leading a district that's working very hard to rapidly reform our reading outcomes for all of our children, and two issues come to mind. I will say first that I got my master's in reading 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and similar to what I'm sure many teachers find, I hear it all the time in our teachers, Why didn't somebody tell me this when I was learning to be a teacher? Why did I have to go get a master's to know how to teach reading? And here I am 25 years later in a district that cannot find teachers coming out of colleges who know how to teach reading. I do not understand why our colleges and universities and why our state level systems do not insist on the kind of research-based reading instructional strategy training that will give a teacher the skills to know what to do when she walks in and meets her class. Secondly, I would say that the schools in Racine Unified, out of 30-some schools, the schools where we are rapidly making advances in reading achievement are schools where our principals also know what they should be looking for and what quality reading instruction should look like. And there is no expectation to become a principal that you know a lick about reading. And if you don't know as a principal what good reading instruction has to look like, you cannot expect it, you cannot observe it and give input and feedback, and you don't even know where to start to help a teacher learn or correct it. So that is another huge flaw in our overall system that does not expect school leaders at every level, elementary, middle, and high, to have a rich understanding of what quality reading instruction looks like. That's my 2 cents. And I'm going to go.
That was good. Thank you.
Anybody want within 30 seconds to respond? And then I'd bet the deans might be able to come back up here and have 10 minutes to wrap it up. Anybody?
I would point out one of the things that Cheryl already mentioned, that among the myriad of other reforms that are happening in teacher prep, which I feel like the people in the audience with are far more familiar with than I am, graduates do now have to pass a Foundations of Reading exam.
That's like a fingernail.
Yeah, so it's one of the steps that we've made, and each university gets to decide how they want to respond.
If you're serious,
to that.
you don't make one little step. You make a rapid transformation of what.
So, and I guess I would also take that question back to the university level, because I do think that many of the deans and many of the people in this room who work in teacher preparation are making rapid transformations because they need to attract people to their programs. Their grads need to be hireable.
I've heard that for 20 years, and I've yet to see a brand new teacher walk in to interview for a job and know what she's talking about. It's very rare. Or he is talking about. It's very rare. And I've been interviewing I was a principal 20 years after my master's in reading, and I rarely met one. And that's inexcusable on all of us.
I'm going to bring the deans up. Let's just give it a first round of applause for our panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A round of applause again for these amazing, amazing panels. I want to give a quick shout out to some of my literacy professors that are actually sitting in the audience here. The things that Molly was talking about is exactly what they do to prepare all of our teachers, undergrad, grad, and doc, for literacy intervention, assessment, instruction. Everyone coming out of Cardinal Stritch gets the depth of what Molly's talking about. Thank you. Thank you.
A very complicated issue. I spent my whole career working on this up until the time I got into the mind-numbing work of academic administration, I should put it that way. And, I just want you to know our Education Deans Group is really open to hearing from you about what you think some of these answers are. I mean, this is my experience, 12 years in Milwaukee, and it's that adult politics trump the welfare of children. And so we get our set ideologies, we become very dogmatic in what it is we believe. Everything is our way or the highway. And who suffers as a result of this? It's the children who suffer from this. We need to get on the same page. So I'm going to make a plug here for Milwaukee Succeeds. It's been slow to develop, but as Mark said, it's been 40 years in the making to where we've gotten to this point educationally. So to build the infrastructures necessary in order to make a difference, to move that needle, I think they're going about it the right way. They're focusing on early childhood. They're focusing on what happens in schools, particularly with reading and math achievement, and then in college and career development, as well as all the supports along the way that are going to be necessary. From our standpoint, as preparers of educators, it hurts to hear any superintendent say that they've never met anybody who could come out of the box teaching reading. I invite any superintendent who holds that belief to come visit some of our programs, particularly our Hartman Literacy and Learning Center, where the principals and superintendents call me incessantly to hire our graduates because they know exactly what to do in terms of teaching reading and literacy.
Absolutely, I'd say the same thing for Cardinal Street.
And anyway, so I don't want to be all knee-jerky and defensive about that, but I just can't even help myself sometimes. But here's what I will say, is if we were going to do one thing to make a significant difference, it really is to ramp up the capacity of our teachers and anybody else who works with children on reading instruction. In Milwaukee, this is a great community for people volunteering. We have all kinds of volunteer tutors. The problem is the skill set, the knowledge, the experience of the tutors who go to these kids who are struggling the most don't match up. We need to develop the capacity of volunteer tutors and people who tutor as part of their regular jobs and our teachers. Because the most important thing to move in the achievement needle is the teacher. That's the thing that research shows over and over and over again without exception. We're going to do our best to do that. Please give us your suggestions on ways we could do a better job of preparing teachers. And take a hard look at Milwaukee Succeeds. There's 300 organizations that are pulling together, which, by the way, is never easy, to try to see if we can't get kids to third grade reading levels that we could be not embarrassed by. We're not even at the respectable level for that in urban education. Actually, in suburban education, we're doing kind of okay with that, but we've really got to, hunker down, full court press, urban education. That's who really needs our help more than anyone. Oh, and by the way, and rural education as well.
Absolutely.
So we want to give you, the audience, the opportunity to tell us what you think are next steps. This is our first public literacy forum, but we want to hear from you. What do you think we need to do next? What do we need to tackle next? What might our next steps be? Yes.
Just hold it down. Not the top one. The rim. The rim.
Okay. I think the legislature should insist that the colleges look into the science of reading and teach it the way it should be. It could be a law.
Thank you. Any other thoughts here?
There we go. Okay. All right. New learning here. One of the things that I really highly recommend is that to transition just from theory to also including practice, because a lot of times teachers don't have the practicality and they're not quite sure how to actually transfer what they learned at the university or college level to the actual classroom with the students that they're actually working with. That's something that I see in my day-to-day work quite often. It's not so much that teachers didn't learn things, but a lot of it is they don't know how to transfer it into a new situation, especially when they're working with kids day to day. That's one of the major issues.
What does it look like in the classroom with real kids?
Right, because that's one of the things that I'm doing right now is supporting some teachers in classrooms, and I'm showing them the practicality of how do you actually teach guided reading groups? How do you even set up for that? How do you have the organizational structure and those kinds of pieces? How do you deal with kids and their attitudes and still get them to read at the same time? Those are the kinds of things that you may not be able to teach in a university level course, but they need to have that in the context of the actual work that they have to do. And that, again, leads to a capacity issue.
I think that is a great comment. And I would tell you that I'm pretty sure across all of our institutions and nationally in teacher education, the word on the street is it's all about clinical practice and clinical experience. And so what we're all trying to do is to give our aspiring teachers more times in the schools to work with their cooperating teachers, to work in authentic environments, not just with, little small groups that we have even in our Hartman Center, but to really get out there. The more they're out there, the better prepared they will be. And, yeah, no, that's really good. But I do want to respond to the wanting legislation about the, this is the way that reading ought to be taught. I would say that we're all required, all our graduates are required to take that same test that they take in Massachusetts. And it involves a great deal, I think, of phonological and orthographic information like would be in the letters training. And based on the data I saw so far, our students are doing pretty well with that. And I also want to tell you one thing, is the scientific evidence is not as unequivocal as people would have you believe. A lot of this is based on fMRI studies that were done with adults. And if you've ever taken an fMRI, you know that that's a really tough environment from which to discern data that you ought to then generalize to children. There's other data that's very supportive. I will tell you straight up, I think the vast majority of children do learn to read well with phonological and orthographic approaches. But I will also tell you, there are some that don't. And if you try to shove that stuff on them, it's cruel and unusual punishment. We have to train our teachers to be willing to accommodate, to tailor, to customize their instruction to every child as he or she presents him or herself. That's when we'll be much better.
Good ideas, good thoughts for next steps. I think, Karen, you're capturing this. I saw another hand up. Yes. And then we'll go here. Okay, go ahead.
To the point of customizing instruction, it seems clear that we ought to be doing early screening of students so that we can understand what their learning profile is and then customize instruction. What is the status of early screening of students in our schools?
Well, it is there. The screening is there, but as we've talked about today a lot, is that you can identify what the issue is, but if the educator does not know how to match the instruction with the need and do that well for, a lot of students, they aren't going to have success, and the students are not going to make gains. So that is the issue again. The process is there, but we don't have that execution from the educator in being able to adapt to all the wide ranges that, again, present themselves. I mean, you think about a teacher in any grade level, they probably have a span of 6 or 7 different grade levels that come to them, and they're supposed to, navigate and do all of that to a very intricate level. And that's a lot to ask somebody to do, but that's what we need them to do. And
we do have required early literacy screening in place in Wisconsin. It began with 5K in 2012 and has slowly expanded to include from 4K through grade 2. Currently, we use a single statewide screener beginning with next year's school year. Each school district, or maybe even school, if a school chooses to set it up that way, will select their own early literacy screener.
I think we have one more right here.
Yeah, I take offense with the thought that phonological instruction is shoved on people, or that it is that phonological education or method is torture to the child who doesn't need it or won't learn that way. Yeah. I take great offense at that. What is really torture is passing children on year after year who do not read.
Agreed. All I would tell you is if you look at the literature on auditory discrimination and auditory memory, you will see that there are certain children for whom that instruction is not appropriate, and that's all I'll say about it.
One more right here. Thank you.
Just one comment that I'd like to make is the acquisition of literacy is very complex, and any attempt to simplify it is really going to lead us in the wrong direction. Teaching is expert decision-making that needs deep and broad knowledge base. One of the things, there's a couple of things that I think have been void of conversations and and deep instruction is we're just beginning to understand the role of culture in mainstream and culturally relevant practices. And Andrell, I really appreciated all your efforts that you've done, but that's not mainstream. Coupled with critical thinking and a complex comprehension. And I think we need to look at the NAEP test to see what basic, proficient, and advanced demands, because at very early levels you can develop critical and complex thinking, but often it's the kids that struggle. And I taught kids for 40 years, I'm a reading specialist, kids that that comprehension is left out of their curriculum. They are not taught that complex, deep critical thinking, and that's critical for the NAEP exam, or to just be a proficient reader.
Great comment.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm going to close with something that I heard, that a lot of amazing work going on here and great comments and great discussion with the audience, but I want to close with an aha moment of something that really surfaced that was said in this, this public forum, and that is, how do we move forward? Look at what is working and focus the funds to bring those quality practices to scale. There was a list of a lot of collaborative practices that are going on that are working, and we need to funnel our energy at the state level and at the national level to look at those practices that are working and funnel our funds there to develop it and grow it to scale.
Just thank you so much for your support. We want to continue to do more programming, and we're open to your suggestions. And one more time, thank our panelists.
Thank you. And our moderator, Mark, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hope to see you at the event for the teachers this evening.